Hi, welcome to Pastor's Chat. For those of you who are just joining us, this is a time for pastors, and if you're a layperson, turn it off or you'll get the hives, because we are quite authentic and we are not very pastor-like on this particular program. Sitting at this table with me is Zach Van Dyke. He was the Christian of the Year for 7 straight years at Orangewood Christian. We keep one of the statues to remind us of his roots. At the end of those 7 years, we found out he wasn't even saved. And everything went south. He's now, believe it or not, the pastor of a megachurch here in Orlando, and the name of that church is
Summit Church.
Summit Church.
Now, listen, no joking. If you go to Summit, please turn this off. That's all. I don't want my people to hear this.
You don't want them to hear this sort of thing.
We'll meet for coffee or something.
And I'm especially spiritual on this Pastor's Chat program, because my pastor is generally here, and I'm on my best behavior. And his name is Kevin Labby, and the church that we're a part of is the Willow Creek Church in Winter Springs.
That's right, and I have no awards like Zach. The only award I got in high school was Health Student of the Year.
Oh.
What student of the year?
Health.
That's a good one.
That means you were the most healthy kid.
Apparently, I don't know what it means.
And I'm Steve, and I have never won an award for anything. I was kicked out by 4 piano teachers. I graduated 3rd from the bottom in a big high school, so I certainly wasn't a witness to Jesus at that time. But somehow I became the spiritual giant.
That's right.
And by the way, I was a pastor for more years than many of you have been alive, which means that I can get to heaven without grace. It's all works, man. The angels don't even ask about Jesus. They say, "You were what? For how long? You come on in, you poor dear." And we have these pastors' chats. We try to do it once a month, just talking about subjects that would be of interest to pastors, and we are so glad that you're a part of it. Our guest today is one of my favorite people in all the world, and that's the nicest thing I'm going to say about him from now on. His name is John Bash, and back when he had hair, and I did too, a lot of years ago, John was on the staff of the church where I was the pastor. And over the years, there have been a number of changes and a lot of pain, a lot of tears. And now John works for an organization called Standing Stone. And just so you know, and we'll have John tell you a little bit about it, Standing Stone is a ministry that reaches out to guys like us. It's a ministry you can trust. They don't share secrets, and they make significant difference in those of us who serve as pastors, and the pain and the difficulty and the doubts and the discouragement that every pastor feels, except those who live in denial. John, thanks for taking some time from a busy schedule to be with us.
Oh, Steve, it's a treat always to talk with you, and particularly to have in the room such other illustrious characters. Thankful, indeed.
John, we'll get to Standing Stone, and then we'll get to pastors. But you're a pretty unusual guy. I mean, you've done everything from direct Legionnaire ministries, to work with youth, to traveling in Europe, to raising money, to being a founding pastor of a church. And it goes on and on. I mean, you've had your fingers in a lot of pies. You have a son who's gone through a horrible time, and you have too. And I want to hear some of your story. Just talk about you.
Well, realize it was 41 years ago that I worked with you. So that's the only number I'm going to tell, except you didn't have hair even then. and I thought you were old at your 40th birthday party. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
But Steve, the reason I think I got to work with you was because I had an upbringing in an unchurched home with an alcoholic father. And so I really didn't have that kind of background and parental figure. Not that you were necessarily one, but you cared about me when I was only 22 and headed into the ministry. And appreciate your summary. I think Legionnaire Ministries will be offended. I was never their director, but I did travel with RC Investa for a while. But then I went on to plant 3 churches, and that pretty much defined my adult life for many years. So I think the big thing for me, though, that probably comes to your attention and will for all of my friends the rest of our life, was a phone call that I got 4 years ago. And it was a phone call. I have 3 children. One is a foster son, a young man I was able to get at the age of 16 from the juvenile justice system. And he was from the ghetto area in Maryland. And then my firstborn was Johnny, and he was the hockey player, preeminent joy of my heart to go to games. My daughter was a soccer guru. But I got that call as this 28-year-old boy was on vacation, and his girlfriend called and said, "Dr. Bash, Johnny's been in an accident." And my heart's stopped a beat, and she said, "And he wants to talk to you." Like that would be a strange thing. Well, little did I know that he was being held out of the river that divides California and Arizona. He had just dove off a boat and put his head in a sandbar, and they had to go in and pull him out of the water. And he said very calmly to me, as he's being held up and they're holding the phone to his ear, said, "Dad, I can't feel my body." And that was the last time Johnny ever felt his body. He is a C6 incomplete quadriplegic. And everybody's life changed, including mine. So that's the highlight, and probably be the beginning of really what transitions me to Standing Stone, if you want me to continue.
Well, I do. Let's talk about I hate what happened to Johnny, and I hate what happened to you and to Vonnie and to your kids and to your ministry and to your mind and to your heart. I hate that. But it makes you, in the ministry where you're serving, a truly wounded healer, doesn't it?
Well, it really did. And my story would be incomplete if I didn't say that after I had left the pastoral ministry 15 years ago to help churches with finance and do some other secular consulting work, I was struggling spiritually. And that occurred. I shouldn't say I'm not sure. For sure, I was not equipped for that kind of thing. I don't think anyone prepares and thinks about what would happen if they became paralyzed, let alone what would happen if one of their children became paralyzed. And so the results following that were that Johnny did the best. Within 2 weeks, he had figured out, so this is the body I have to live with for the rest of my life. I can't turn myself over half a turn in bed. I can't do all these things. I am totally dependent. How am I going to live? And in that context, and I did all the reading that I could. That's the way I think all of us are here. We study up as much as we can. And quickly, I was seeing everybody talking about caregivers. And I was like, wait, I'm trying to figure out how to deal with my son, and they're talking about caring for the caregivers. So this is weird. I want my son to be cared for. And what I realized is that Johnny needs caregivers. The doctor told us that he would need caregiving 24/7 the rest of his life. That is not proven to be true. But as we had to deal with who is going to help Johnny get from bed and do this and that, what part does mom play? What part does dad play? What part do caregivers give? I realized caregivers get really discouraged. And I started to think about the whole thing in the beginning of your program with the sheep in the background, and the whole thing of God's economy of things is that he has shepherd to care for sheep, and things change when the sheep, particularly in this case, can't even move his body. And he needs someone to help. He needs a caregiver. And as we transitioned and caregivers would turn over, and sometimes, believe it or not, can be really as much of the problem as the patient himself. I thought of the pastors that I knew and how many phone calls I get from other pastors who are helping people and yet are hurting themselves. And just the importance of taking care of those who take care of the sheep. And that, in fact, is what our job as pastors is to care for the sheep. Well, then who cares for the shepherd? So that's the essence. It's equipped me to say, I don't just understand theoretically, I understand really with the bumps and bruises of life. I can say, yeah, I've been through that, and it's hard, but I'm there to walk through it with you too.
Do you, is it, when I became a pastor, when I was ordained, I never liked the job. I always, I never woke up in the morning and said, God, you're so good to let me do this. I said, could you let me out of it and I'll be good the rest of my life? But I stayed with it, and I did it because I was called to it and I couldn't get out of it. God had me, in a colloquial way, by the short hairs is what it was. And so I stayed. But I look back on those early days, and I don't think it was as hard then as it is today to be a pastor. Have things changed? Is it more difficult?
I really don't think there's any doubt about that. Now that I can officially be old as I look just at my lifetime, when I went into the ministry, the profession itself really was respected. It was a profession, and most people had to be trained significantly, and ministers had a established place in the community. And from that time till now, when we went through the time of kind of some of the charlatans in ministry exposed, and people becoming more and more cynical as secularism became more prominent in the culture, you got to realize, in a sense, we are in a declining industry. And people don't like to put it that way because that doesn't sound very optimistic, but church attendance is just going down. And we can talk about the exceptions to the rule. But I picture it as it was mentioned, Kevin mentioned a connection with Pittsburgh. I grew up in Pittsburgh when the steel industry was going downhill, and it was gray and it was depressing. People were losing their jobs. And there's a sense that that's really affects the ministry as men who have great intentions and a lot of training go in and see their congregation shrink sometimes. Not everybody's like Zach and has to make a church. For a lot of people, if you know the numbers, people just aren't going to church anymore. So that hurts the person in charge who's trying to do the right thing when they look and say, what am I doing, God? How come Zach's doing so well and my church isn't?
Yeah, I mean, I should say it's mega and declining, but no,
It's not.
no, but I think you are. I mean, just culturally, people are coming to church less, and even if they do come to church, they come less frequently than they used to. Which it's hard not to take that personally too when you're the guy up front. But Recently, a couple months, like 2 months ago, I went into like a senior team meeting, and I just started crying. Which people think I'm an emotional person, but I don't cry very easily, especially in front of other people, because I was overwhelmed. We had to deal with a lot of really heavy stuff in the church over the last year. I had done already 5 funerals that year already, and they were all tragic. They weren't like old people, who've lived a long life. It was, very tragic circumstances. And I just went in and said,
By the way, that's tragic too for the old person. I just want you to know that. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's just a different kind of funeral. So anyways, I really went in, and I didn't intend to do this, but I just said, I cannot work today. I cannot keep working like this. And unfortunately, I had people around me on my team who just sent me home. They took everything off my schedule for the next 2 weeks. And I know that was a luxury that I had that a lot of people who are pastors would not have that. But I think it's something that we don't talk about, is that even if things look like they're going well in your church, the stress that you carry from carrying other people's secrets and burdens and doing funerals, if you're not being cared for, I mean, you just burn out. I mean, there was nothing I could do. And so anyways, I probably needed more than 2 weeks, but I feel better now having those 2 weeks.
Do you, John, do you train leadership to be sensitive to this sort of thing?
It is one thing. It's really one of the minor things that we do at Standing Stone. But when people come to us, in a sense, and ask, what can we do for our pastors? That's really where we're professionals. And we love it when we get those phone calls. We try not to make that in any way competitive with when we're dealing with a pastor in a mentor kind of relationship like what I do. But one of the things we have on our website, for example, are like 52 things you can do for your pastor. And, as Zach said, he had people who said, here, take 2 weeks. Well, not everybody has that privilege of having sensitive leadership to do it. And so one of the other things that we do, particularly, and this would have perhaps been great for you at the time, Zach, is that we have retreats that are specifically designed for a pastor and his wife to meet with a mentor couple, a retreat specialist, really. And the 4 of them go to a luxury home, a luxury retreat. We have a number of them that have been donated in some beautiful places in the country, and spend a week. And it is life-changing. It saves people oftentimes who might leave the ministry from leaving the ministry just by having that kind of affirmation and healing time.
John, this is Kevin. One of the things that's on my heart is, Zach is, I think, a little younger than me, but looking at the young guys that are now coming up out of college into seminary, training for ministry, we have a couple of apprentices at our church. And when you were describing Pittsburgh, I lived there for several years. I know exactly what you're talking about. I grew up in Buffalo, New York. I think even they sense with their optimism that the landscape is changing considerably. And I've tried to encourage them in many different ways to what I think some of the implications of that changing landscape will be for them so that they can prepare ahead of time. But I'm very interested in kind of your thinking. What can we be telling these younger guys and gals who are coming up into ministry that are going to be ministering in a much different environment than almost every generation of American pastor, in recent memory, has had? What would you say?
Kevin, don't you think every pastor has the book in them, What They Didn't Teach Me in Seminary?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We all think we could write that book. And the truth is, it's because we could. And I think a big reason for that is, unlike Steve, and I have to say something good about him, most guys in seminary really were not church pastors.
Yeah.
I mean, Steve spent his life as a church pastor and then taught preaching. That's nice because he can tell the truth. But if your expertise is in Hebrew and you're the sharpest guy in the class and have never had to preach every Sunday, it's a different game.
Mm.
And then add to it the fact that most of us grew up, and I'll say us, I'm not going to include the younger ones in here, but we grew up in a time where people actually learned the Bible whether they wanted to or not, because they were dragged to Sunday school. Mm-hmm. And now, of course, it's popular to talk about the nuns. But the nuns really don't have a clue about the basics of Christian culture, of the Bible, of things that we take for granted. So the notion that people go into a new community and say, what church are we going to go to, just is silly anymore. And unfortunately, that's traveled upwards. Even those who are older and even retiring, sometimes church has already become passé. So I would say to realize that you are going into a profession it just does well for us to remember the Apostle Paul, when he was struck by the bright light, brighter than the noonday sun, and for 3 days was blind. And Ananias was told, go to him. And the curious thing is, not only was he being asked to go to this man who had been persecuting the church, the message was, here, give him this message. Look at the things he will suffer for my sake. Mm-hmm. I'm like, gee, there's a sales pitch. Really, how privileged he is. You're going to get to suffer for me. And there's a sense that has become the message to pastors today, I think.
Yeah.
That's good. You want to add something to that?
No, I'm just along that line. I think that's a great answer, because a lot of the assumptions of folks going into ministry, at least when I was coming up, were, that the most gifted and driven guys are going to end up in relatively comfortable environments. And that's not necessarily the case, nor should it have ever been the case. And so there's an awareness, just looking at what you're doing in ministry, that I think it's incumbent upon us as pastors now who are shepherding these younger guys and gals coming up to recalibrate so that they don't fall into traps that otherwise could have been avoided.
Yeah, I would add one thing. A number of years ago when I started a church, and it's now like 1,800 people, but we used to go to a church planting conference at one of those mega churches. And I thought, wow, people are leaving here so discouraged because they're thinking we would like to have lights at our church. And these people have lights lighting lights. The conferences on the one hand were like, really, wow, this is amazing. Look at what this megachurch is doing, and the video and the drama and the power, the way they get to communicate the gospel message. And then they'd go home and it's like, who's setting up the folding chairs in the cafeteria? Mm-hmm. And it was hard. And I think now it's more of setting up the chairs in the cafeteria. It's going to be setting up the chairs in the church that's fallen down, and you can't afford to replace the pews, fortunately, but you get the idea.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's that description of Paul, and I love that, God doesn't sugarcoat what he's calling us into. Like there's no bait and switch. If we understand and we're studying the scriptures, like we know what we're walking into. But where I think I've had a problem, and this is my own sin and needing to please people and all that, is there's the idea of, yes, I am called to suffer for the sake of the people that I'm shepherding, but isn't there a line where it becomes not shepherding them, it's just setting really poor boundaries?
But isn't that the essence of the problem, is which is which?
Right.
When are we suffering because we're doing the right thing? And when are we suffering because we're a jerk or have the bad methodology? And I think that's really what breaks us down. Mm-hmm. I don't think I've done a good job with that at all in my life. Many years ago, Steve encouraged me to publish. And I said, what do I have to say? I'd look at somebody else who had already written a better book on the subject than I did. And that was, I felt like it was genuine humility. Now I look back and say it was stupid. But when we try to sort through, I know the number one reason people say when they look at what church they're going to, the number one reason is always basically the pastor and the teaching, and are they teaching the Bible, and is it relevant to my life? Period. I would say, too, when they're leaving out the door, the number one reason they will give is because the pastor and his teaching and its lack of relevance, or somehow the church is not meeting a specific need. And where it really is the clearest to me is when a church is looking for a pastor. In fact, I'm considering a couple churches as an interim because it's such a key time in a church's life. I really have a heart for the churches at that point. But when you look at what churches are looking for in a pastor, it's just amazing. They say, we know it's not going to be Jesus and they're not going to be perfect at everything, but we just want this. And you go around the committee and each person says a different thing. And by the time you get done, they want Jesus, and then they wouldn't really. We know that. But the list is still as long as it ever was, even with those who say, yeah, we know he's real and he's a sinner. Yeah, but he better be good at administration. He better be a good leader, and he better have engaging small groups, and he better be a great preacher. You get the idea.
Yep.
Yeah,
that's why I'm dying at my church. I can't go through that process of reading that job description again. It's too much. It's too much.
Hey, John, when you come alongside a couple, a pastor, his wife, or whatever, when you come alongside of them, I would imagine by the time they find their way to you, they are often at the very end.
Yeah.
And trust and the willingness to be vulnerable, to express any intimacy is, I would think for me, it would probably be almost gone. And so to enter into an environment with somebody that you don't necessarily know going into the retreat environment or something, kind of what kinds of things are you doing in that environment, apart from prayer, obviously, that would enable the kind of healing that you're seeing over such a relatively short but admittedly intense time?
Yeah, well, there's two sides of that. Let's look at the positive side. Standing Stone's really proactive in the sense we even work with those in seminaries and young guys. We take an initiative. Those who have my role, I'm not a retreat shepherd. I'm actually kind of a mentoring shepherd. So we take initiative with pastors in where we are and pastors that we know to have that kind of special confidential relationship and say, we're just here to help you. You probably know we don't charge them anything. And so one of the reasons for that is because pastors are so used to getting hit up. Always people want something. It's like, can I come speak at your church, or can I do this, or can you give us money? So we're not doing that. We're taking the initiative. And so we already have the relationships that are preventative, if you will, or at least attempt to have that. But the other side is when those are in trouble, the reason they often seek us is because we are a confidential place. And, denominations have tried to do it, and other places have tried to say, oh, we're safe. And then you find out, oh, you're safe until you're not, and it happens to affect my job. And so the good news is that most of actually all of us who are Standing Stone shepherds have been through enough battles that we know, in a sense, we have skin in the game to help these people. And they can basically let down and be real and find that most of the time we end up saying, you know what? Yeah, I went through something like that too. In fact, I know Joe who's going through that. Why don't even the three of us get together and talk? And that's the biggie. When people let out what's really going on, what the secrets are behind the scene, that's half the healing already.
Oh, John. We're about out of time. John, how can people get in touch with you?
I'm really pleased with our website, just standingstoneministry.org. It's worth plucking around. It's not necessarily the best, doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but it's worth looking at just the basic things that you can do to help. Of course, you can try to find my beautiful face on there and click the donate button, and that helps me do the work more. As I mentioned, I do other things as well. So certainly contributing is always a big one. And then those people, all of us have a team of people that pray for us and are part of our own support teams. So we really, got to be walking the walk. One of the things that we all have committed to together is that we commit 3 hours a week to pray just for those in the ministry and Christian leadership, men and women, as well as we actually have Standing Stone Women Shepherds who deal with other women in the ministry and with pastors' wives, which is real neat. So I just say get on to Standing Stone Ministry, singular.org.
All right. John, I know you're busy, man, and I appreciate you taking this time for us. It's been very, very beneficial. I hope you'll be a go-to guy that we can come to often for these kinds of discussions.
I always like an excuse to talk to you guys and just love the encouragement you give me on the radio, and the materials you do for pastors are just so real. And there aren't many that are this real. So thank you.
Okay, guys, that's it. I want to have a closing prayer, and then take up an offering, but I'm not going to do that. Hey, we're so glad that you were a part of this, and we'll give you some publicity on the next one, so you know. Stay with our website. It's keylife.org. A lot of good stuff there, and some good stuff for pastors. And so until next time and I'm speaking for Jinx and John and Zach and Kevin and me, hope you have a great day, and we'll look forward to the next time.